Thank you. Thank you very much for that welcome, and actually, thank you for inviting me to speak to this group. It's an enormous honor and privilege to be able to speak to you, to share some Torah with you all. Chesed Shel Emes, to be engaged in Chesed Shel Emes, in the incredible mitzvah of kindness to people at a time of loss, and to a mace, to someone who has been nifta, is a very remarkable and special thing. And I truly feel honored to be able to speak to all of you here. And also in particular to wish a good evening to the Rebbitzin, and what a zechus it is really, and a pleasure and privilege to be able to share some Torah with you, Rebbitzin, and to thank you so much on behalf of myself and all of us for everything that you do for us and for the community. So I wanted to speak about Birchas Hamazon, firstly because I love the mitzvah of Birchas Hamazon. I love Brachas in general. Like many people, I suspect there are occasions when we struggle with tefillah, with davening. Tefillah, davening can be lengthy, it can be repetitive, it can be difficult. But Brachas and even Birchas Hamazon in general are shorter. They're a little bit more easier for us to relate to. They're just a few moments which we take out of our schedules and our lives, and we stop and we think about our connection to Hashem and the appreciation and gratitude that we owe him, and therefore Birchas Hamazon, really benching, is for me a very precious and beautiful mitzvah. And therefore, when I was asked to speak, I thought this is something that the Torah of Birchas Hamazon, speaking a little bit about benching, is something that I would like to share, and hopefully offer some insight into something that we all do a lot. We engage in benching several times a week, and hopefully to try and share some understanding into it is what this evening is about. Now, brachas, benching, saying a bracha to Hashem, we make many brachas in our daily lives. There are different categories of brachas. There are different blessings that we make on mitzvahs, in davening. Birchas Hamazon falls under the subcategory of Birchas Hanehenin, brachas which are made on as we appreciate and enjoy the gifts of this world. The more familiar Birchas Hanehenin are those that we make before we eat. So before we eat anything, we make a bracha, and this is the more familiar type of Birchas Hanehenin. Birchas Hamazon is also a type of bracha on enjoyment of this world, but a bracha that is made afterwards. Now, the Gemara discusses the origins of brachas, and it says that brachas most of the blessings that we say, most of the brachot that we say, do not have a direct source in the Torah. It is a svara, it is reason. It is only reasonable that we should request from Hashem permission to enjoy this world, and that we should thank him for that enjoyment. Svara, it's reason that we make brachas. The Gemara then links this to a pasuk. The pasuk says, "LaHashem ha'aretz u'maloa," the whole world belongs to Hashem. And there's a contradictory pasuk which says, "Hashemayim, shemayim LaHashem," the heavens, that which is transcendent and spiritual, belongs to God. But ha'aretz nosan livnei adam, the world, the land, has been given to us human beings. So who does the world belong to? Does it belong to Hashem? LaHashem ha'aretz u'maloa. Does it belong to us human beings? Answers the Gemara that the bracha is the crucial currency that transfers ownership. Until we make a bracha, it belongs to Hashem, because the world is his. When we make a bracha, we don't pay for what we're given, we merely acknowledge that it comes from Hashem, and through that acknowledgement and recognition that it comes from him, we already have permission to enjoy and appreciate the world. So this is the concept of a bracha, and this applies to brachas that we say before eating and to the brachas that we say after eating. However, benching Birchas Hamazon has a unique quality to it, in that it is the only bracha which isn't just svara, it's not just reasonable that we should make a bracha, but it is specifically mentioned in the Torah. And therefore it has the status of a Torah mitzvah, one of the positive commandments, mitzvahs haseh, one of the 613 commandments in the Torah, rather than, as with other brachas, being generated by human reason and therefore having the status of a rabbinic obligation. So Birchas Hamazon is unique It is part of a family of brachas of Birchas on the one hand, but on the other hand, it rises above all other brachas. It has its own unique status in that it is the only Torah blessing which we are obligated to say as far as Torah law is concerned. Where does the Torah tell us to say this bracha? So this is a pasuk in Devarim, chapter 8. And in a few moments, I'm going to briefly screen share with everyone the psukim so we can see them inside, because we miss the nuance when we don't look at the psukim inside. But for now, I'll just reference, this is a pasuk in Devarim chapter 8, in which the pasuk says, V'achalta, you shall eat, or when you eat, v'savata, and when we are satisfied or satiated, then, u'beirachta es Hashem elokecha, we should bless Hashem, you should bless Hashem your God, ala oretz atova asher notanach, on the goodly land which God, Hashem, gave to you, gave to us. So this is the mitzvah. When we eat and are satiated, we should say a bracha after so doing as thanks to Hashem. Now, I want for a few moments to actually look at these psukim inside, because when we see these psukim in context, I think it gives us a far richer understanding of what is really going on and how to understand the context. So I hope now everyone can see. Can someone just give me a nod if they can see the screen shared? And you should be able to see the opening word should be Devarim chapter 8, Deuteronomy chapter 8. Okay, so it says as follows. This is, let's contextualize this. This is part of Moshe's final, very lengthy speech to the Jewish people, in which he says many, many things, including giving them mussar, rebuke, or a reminder of their core values. And Moshe says as follows, and I'm just going to look very briefly through this chapter. I would urge everyone who's interested in looking at this in more detail to, after the shiur, really take out Chumash and look at this chapter, because we can only appreciate benching when we've seen it in context of this perek in Devarim. And it says as follows, Moshe is telling everyone, keep all the Torah. That's Pasuk Aleph. Pasuk 2, remember the whole way in which you went in the wilderness for 40 years. So what the Pasuk has said so far is Moshe says, keep the mitzvahs, remember the journey. We're now at the end of a journey, a 40-year journey, remember it. Pasuk 3, it was a tough journey. He afflicted you, you suffered with hunger, but you were fed mon, a food which you didn't know previously. So Moshe says, remember the midbar, remember the journey. Why do you have to remember the journey? Because you're about to enter into Eretz Yisrael. And you may in Eretz Yisrael come to forget what it was like in the midbar, what it was like in the journey. You may forget the story of the mon. Therefore, remember it, don't forget. It's really important for you to remember. What else happens in the midbar? Pasuk 4, your clothes didn't work out, etc., etc. Pasuk 6, keep all the mitzvahs. Pasuk 7, for Hashem, it's Hashem who is bringing you to this good land. It has brooks of water, it has fountains, it has depths springing forth in the valleys and the hills. So you're about to go to Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. It's a wonderful land. Pasuk 8, a very famous pasuk. It's the land of wheat and barley, vines and figs, pomegranates, olive trees and honey, etc. The 7 species. Pasuk 9, it's a land in which it has many other resources. It has bread, it has iron, it has grass. Pasuk 10, our pasuk, V'chalta v'savata, the central pasuk of the whole series. When you eat, remember to make a bracha. So this is the middle pasuk, as it were, of the chapter. Then the chapter begins unwinding. Remember, says Moshe, is repeating, remember, pasuk 11. Don't forget what happens. Keep all the commandments. Why? Because pasuk 12, pentochel v'savata, maybe you'll eat and be satiated. You'll build good houses. You'll have everything you need. Pasuk 14, you'll become arrogant. You'll forget God who took you through this great desert, which was dangerous. There were serpents there. There were scorpions. It was thirsty ground. There was no water. Don't forget, Pasuk 16, that Hashem fed you mon. Don't let yourselves, Pasuk 17, become people who say, it's my power and my might which has gotten me all this wealth. Pasuk 18, remember Hashem who gives you strength. So this chapter, really important chapter, has a structure which often occurs in the Torah. It's known as a chiasmic structure. It's a symmetrical chapter built up. Picture a mountain rising to a peak, climbing up step by step, reaching a peak, and then coming down step by step, unraveling itself. And the chiasmic structure is, remember Egypt, remember to keep mitzvahs. The desert was tough. You went on a journey. Remember the mon that you were fed on this journey, because you're going to get to the land of Israel, where there's so much good things, so many good things. It's such a wonderful country with so much given to you, and you might forget what it was like to be in the Midbar. Therefore, when you enjoy the produce, make sure you bless Hashem for it, peak of the mountain, and then it begins unraveling, going through the same structure in a symmetrical thought manner, winding down. Because Israel's got amazing things. Israel has so much good, but you may go fat there. You may become presumptuous. You may take it for granted. You may think it's your might that's achieved this. You may forget how tough it was in the desert. Don't forget that in the desert you were thirsty, it was dangerous. And therefore always carry that with you and remember Hashem, because it's He who gives you power. This is the structure of this chapter, which means to say that one way of thinking about benching is that it converts all food into mon. When we were in the desert, we had no illusions. We realized it was a tough place. There was no water. It was full of scorpions. The bread that we were eating was not bread that we farmed ourselves, that we got through our own might. It was granted to us as lechem min hashamayim, bread from the heavens. But we now enter Eretz Yisrael. We now live the rest of our lives post-desert, post-wilderness. We're not living in dry places with scorpions and snakes where we can't earn our own living. We are farming ourselves. We're eating lechem min haaretz, bread from the ground. But convert that bread from the ground back into manna, back into mon, back into lechem min hashamayim. Remember the midbar experience. Realize that this isn't ultimately our own power and our own achievements and our own strength that gives rise to this. Realize that this is all really in truth manna from heaven. And in truth, it's all lechem min hashamayim. It's all bread from the heavens. So this is the context of benching and the way to think about benching. It's a way of carrying the desert with us through the rest of our lives. As we live in the lap of luxury in our lives, remember that we are desert people. We're a wandering desert folk. We once went through the desert where it was tough, where we realized that everything we had came from Hashem. Always remain a desert people. Always remember, despite the comforts, that we shouldn't take for granted everything we've got. It's ultimately all lechem min hashamayim. It's more mon, manna from heaven. This is the structure of the psukim. Now, with that introduction, I want to try and use the time that is available to look at the structure of Birchas Hamazon, of benching, very briefly, understand the overall structure, and then spend as much time as we have left looking in detail at some of the text that is used to actually construct benching and gives us the formula of what we say. So what is benching? What are the crucial things that we're meant to be saying in Birchas Hamazon? So I'm going to share the screen one more time, and then I won't share the screen again. And we're just going to look at the crucial pasuk that's relevant over here. And this is pasuk 10, pasuk yud, which is, I'll highlight very briefly, pasuk 10, pasuk yud. This is the pasuk, the key critical text that we're looking at. V'chalta v'savata. So the Gemara in Brachas breaks this pasuk up into three components, three sections. V'chalta v'savata, we eat and are satiated. Or beirachta es Hashem elokecha. We should bless, you should bless, it's an instruction, Hashem your God. So core part A, core part 1 of Birchat Hamazon is thanking Hashem for the food, the bread that we have eaten. But then there's more to it. Al ha'aretz, we also need to thank Hashem for the land, and not for any old land, but Tova, the good land, Asher Nosanov, that God has given us. So we need to have a second bracha in which we express appreciation for the land of Israel, and a third bracha in which we express appreciation for the goodness of the land of Israel, for that which is good about it. So this is the crucial text, and the Gemara analyzes the pasuk and sees in it three components: the core blessing on the food that we have eaten, a second element which is on the land, and a third element on the goodness of the land. Now, what does this refer to? The first bracha is the bracha on the bread that we eat. Hazon es ha'olam kulo b'tuvo b'chein b'chesed v'rachmim. We thank Hashem for the nutrition, the nourishment that we have. The second bracha, Noderacha Hashem Elokeinu, we thank Hashem. Al shinchal talavisena eretz chem dotov v'chava. We thank Hashem for the goodness of the land of Israel. And the third bracha is the spiritual goodness of the land, Hatova. What at its essence, at its root, out of where does the spirituality of the land of Israel radiate? From the center, from the Beis HaMikdash, the temple, and Yerushalayim, the holy city of Jerusalem. And therefore the third bracha's theme is that of the Beis HaMikdash and Yerushalayim. Rachim Hashem Elokeinu Yisrael Hamech v'Yisrael Hamech v'al Sion Mishkan Kvedech on Sion v'al Yerushalayim on the holy city of Yerushalayim Mikashecha u'v'nei Yerushalayim HaKadosh v'mhei v'yameinu, etc. The theme of the third bracha is thanks, or nowadays a request for mercy for Yerushalayim and the Beis HaMikdash, Hatova, the good land out of which it radiates. So the key or fundamental elements of Birchas Hamazon are these first three blessings of appreciation for the food, for Eretz Yisrael, and for the spiritual goodness embedded within Eretz Yisrael, out of which radiates the Kadisha to Eretz, the sanctity of the land, the Beis HaMikdash, and Yerushalayim. There are two more components added to benching. A fourth component, which is the bracha of Hatov v'Hameitiv, Baruch Atah Hashem, after we finish your B'nai, Hatov v'Hameitiv, and a fifth section of benching, which is Harachmon, which we'll come on to in a couple of moments. But where do the first three sections come from? So as we said, these are the core Torah obligations of the bracha: thanking for bread, thanking for Israel, Eretz Yisrael, and thanking for Yerushalayim and the Beit HaMikdash. The Gemara in Brachas tells us that the first bracha of Birchas Hamazon was composed by Moshe Rabbeinu himself. When did he compose it? Presumably on the lechem, the bread which they ate in the midbar, the lechem min hashamayim, the manna, the bread from heaven which they ate. So the first bracha clicked into existence. It came into existence already in the era of Moshe. The second bracha was composed when? By Yehoshua, because only in the life of Yeshua, as we know, did they enter the land of Israel, and were they now able to say, Noda, thank you Hashem for the gift of Eretz Yisrael. The third bracha, Yerushalayim and the Beis HaMikdash, were composed, says the Gemara in Brachas, by David and Shlomo, because again, if we remember our Nach, even though Eretz Yisrael was by and large conquered in the life of Yeshua, there were pockets of resistance that remained, and certainly the full conquest and sanctity of Yerushalayim was only achieved in the life of David, and the building of the Beis HaMikdash in the life of Shlomo. And therefore the third bracha, in which we express originally appreciation, now a request for mercy for Yerushalayim and the Beis HaMikdash, came into existence in the life of Shlomo and of David and his son Shlomo, David, and Solomon, the kings who conquered Yerushalayim and built the Beis HaMikdash. So these are the three brachas of Birchas Hamazon, of benching, the three blessings, and the times in which they were created or by and large authored. The fourth bracha of benching is much later. Fourth bracha of benching is not from the Torah, it's rabbinic, and it's quite late in history. So Birchas Hamazon itself, the core bulk of Birchas Hamazon, is amongst the most ancient tefillahs or prayers that we ever say, dating back to the life of Moshe and Yeshua and David and Shlomo. Very, very ancient prayers. I mean, just by way of example, if we're looking at a text written by Moshe, we're going 3,300 years back. The Amidah, in contrast, the Shemona Esrei, written by the men of the Great Assembly, the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, at the beginning of the era of the second Beis HaMikdash, we're talking about 2,400 years ago. So about 1,000 years later than that. The fourth blessing of benching is a late bracha. It dates back to the Beta revolt against rebellion against Rome. So we're now looking only at a mere 1,900 years ago. The Beis HaMikdash was destroyed approximately 2,000 years ago. About 60 years after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, the Bar Kokhba revolt, headquartered in Beitar, a village near Yerushalayim, a rebellion against the Romans, initially a successful rebellion, eventually put down by Hadrian, familiar to us here in England from Hadrian's Wall, because that's a feel for the magnitude of the Roman Empire. Hadrian is busy in the north of England building walls against the barbaric Picts and Scots, the tribespeople outside the empire. He is sent scurrying back to Rome and then sent off to faraway occupied Eretz Israel, and to put down those pesky Jews who were revolting in the Bar Kokhba revolt. And eventually, tragically, as we know, the Beitar rebellion is put down. And for many years, they are unable even to bring the Haruge Beitar, the victims, the martyrs of the Beitar revolt, to burial. So I'm talking here to an audience that knows the centrality of the mitzvah of Kovod HaMeis, of honor to those who have passed away, the degree to which we view this as central and essential, and the pain, the lingering pain of the families of the Beitar martyrs and of them themselves and their neshamas in not being able to be brought to Kevei Yisrael, to be buried in a fitting manner in line with halacha, lingers until eventually they are allowed to bury. And they go and miraculously, they're able to gather together all the bodies and they're able to bring them to Kavara. And a bracha, believe it or not, is composed for this remarkable event. Amazing. And what is the content of this bracha? The fourth bracha of Birchas Hamazon. And what do we say in this bracha? It's an exultant outpouring of love for Hashem and the goodness with which he runs the world. It's an incredible bracha. And the content of the bracha is God, our Father, our King, our Creator, our Redeemer, who gives us everything. And then we go on and we praise Hashem. Hatov, he's good. He's meitiv lakol. He does goodness to everyone. Shebachol yom v'yom, every single day. Who hate it, who meitiv, he hated lanu. He does good. He will do good to us. He continues to pour over us chen and chesed and rachmim, kindness and mercy and loving givingness, redemption and salvation. It's an amazing bracha of an outflow of love over an event which starts off as perhaps one of the deepest and darkest and most tragic events in history, matching really the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash itself in terms of its impact on Jewish life. So why this exultant bracha, and why here is it added to the end of Birchas Hamazon, to the end of benching? What has, as great as it is, has the burial of the Beitar rebels got to do with Birchas Hamazon? And the answer is because we are trying to take benching and extend it into the Golus era. Because let's not forget, benching is created by the Torah as a way of when we are living in the comfort of Eretz Yisrael, having arrived from the desert, we're no longer in the wilderness, and we're now in the safety and comfort of Eretz Yisrael, and we see the great bounty and wealth we're given, and we may forget, we may not remember that this is all from Hashem, that this is all really mom from heaven, and therefore we have to thank and appreciate and express our gratitude for this wonderful land. Remember those Pesukim, the 7 species, Eretz Chitul Sa'ora, Eretz Asher B'Miskanos Teichel B'Lechem. It's a land with springs, with resources, with metals. It's this wonderful land. So benching is meant to be said as an appreciation. But how do we do it in Golus? How do we do it in exile when we don't have all these brachas? When we may not notice them? The answer is by remembering the message of the Haruge Beitar. As hard and as difficult as it was, in the depth of the tragedy of the Beitar story, we can see a moment of kindness, a glimmer of hope, that we are eventually able to bring the Haruge Beitar to burial, and we're able to bring closure to that difficult parsha, and miraculously we could gather together their preserved bodies and we're able to bring them to Kavura. So this is an incredible inspiration. In the depth of the pain of a Beitar story, we can still appreciate the kindness of Hashem, and we can exultantly declare this fourth bracha because of the little bit of comfort that we can find even in the darkness, and therefore this is attached to benching. Even if we're not in the mood to express our appreciation for everything that's given to us, remember that we can carry benching even into the exile, even into the darkness. This is the message of the fourth bracha of benching. And again, an idea that I wanted to share with you, ladies, who are osek in bringing comfort and kindness to people in the very dark stages of their lives. It's a very, very dark time in their lives, and yet bringing that little spark of comfort in allowing the nifta to be honored appropriately and to be brought to Kavuras Yisrael. So this is the fourth part of benching. And finally, the fifth part of benching, which has a very late origin, It dates to the era of the Gaonim. So we're talking somewhere around the year 700 in the Common Era, so roughly 1,000 to 1,300 years ago. And these are the Harachamons. These are a late addition to benching. Since the theme of the fourth bracha of benching is mercy of Hashem, even in dark times, and seeing his overflowing goodness, we attach onto benching a request for his continued mercy. We've just eaten a meal, we're grateful for the food we've had, and we ask Hashem to continue to sustain us. And these are the Harachamons, which date, as I said, only into the era of the Gaonim, roughly 1,300, 1,200 years ago. So to summarize, in essence, benching is part of a family of brachas based upon what the Gemara calls svara, reason. It makes sense for us to thank Hashem for that which we have. It is specified in the Pasuk as one of the 613 commandments. It's a positive Torah obligation to bench. It's a mitzvah to bench. It is the only act of bracha or benching that we engage in, which is from Torah. It's the concept of benching is to remind us not to grow smug and comfortable in our wealth, but to remember that we are desert people, we are wilderness sojourners, and that what we have ultimately is all a gift of mon from heaven. And the core part of Birchas Hamazon, the core part of benching, has three elements to it. Thanks for the food, composed by Moshe, perhaps the most ancient tefillah that we ever say. Thanks for Eretz Yisrael, composed in the time of Yehoshua, for the gift of the land of Israel. And thanks for the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim, composed by David and Shlomo, as a thanks for the gift of the source of the spiritual goodness of the land of Israel, the Beis HaMikdash and Yerushalayim. And then there's two additional elements that date back to more recent times: the fourth bracha for the Harugei Beitar, for the martyrs of Beitar, and thanks for their burial, and then the Harachmons, which date back to the era of only the era of the Gaonim, of much more recent vintage. So this is the structure of benching and the broad outline of what we say. But let's now try and have a look at this in a little more detail and engage with some thoughts about the text of benching, and use the time that is available to us to understand with a little bit more care what we're actually saying when we bench. So we're moving from the macro to the micro. We've spoken about the broad sweeping structure of benching. We're now going to look in detail at how this is actually expressed. Now, the first word of Birchat Hamazon, or benching, or the literal translation of the word benching, is to bless. And the first word is Baruch, blessed, Baruch. Baruch who is blessed, or who are we blessing? Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam. Blessed are you, O Hashem, the creator of the world. Now, this is something that perhaps has been addressed in other contexts, so I'm not going to speak about it in too much depth, other than to point out that this is a remarkable statement. Baruch atah Hashem, blessed are you Hashem, or may you be blessed Hashem. I mean, when we give a bracha to someone, we assume we are in a position to give them a bracha. I mean, think back to the sedras that we've just read. Parshas Vayechi, Yaakov gives a blessing to his children, to all of the Shvatim, to all the tribes, famously crossing his hands. He gives the bracha to Ephraim and Manasseh. Yaakov is fit to give a bracha. In earlier sedras, Yitzchak gives Yaakov and Esav a bracha, because they're entitled to do so. Hashem gives people brachas. Hashem gives Avraham a bracha. Hashem gives Yaakov a bracha. Who are we to give Hashem a bracha? And surely every bracha indicates a lack in the recipient. The recipient of the bracha needs something, and we give a bracha to the recipient of the bracha that they should have whatever they need. What does Hashem, who is kol yochel, who is all powerful, who is infinite and has everything, what on earth does he need from us mortals? So there are two approaches in the classic sources to deal with this issue. One approach is we are not giving Hashem a bracha, we are stating a fact. We are just saying, we're not saying may you be blessed, but we are saying you are blessed. We are acknowledging that Hashem is the source of all blessings. And this is befitting, this is appropriate. When we make a bracha, we hold an apple in our hands. We recognize this apple is Borei or eight that comes from the creator of the fruit of the tree. We've just eaten a meal, we bench on it. We recognize that Hashem is the source of all blessings. This is one approach. A second approach put forward by the Nefesh HaChaim, Reb Chaim Volozhin, the student of the Vilna Gaon, and the founder of the Volozhina Yeshiva, the first of the yeshivas in the modern era, one of the founding fathers of the what's called nowadays Misnagdim, or the Ashkenazi non-Hasidic approach to life, Reb Chaim Volozhin. He says that actually we are giving a bracha to Hashem in a very interesting and particular way. He points out, as do others, that the etymology of the word bracha is that which is overflowing or overspilling. In modern Hebrew, we have the word brecha, which is a pool, but in classical Hebrew, it referred particularly to the overflow pool of a spring. So when you have spring bubbling out of the ground, if you've seen springs in anywhere in Eretz Yisrael, you'll see that there's a pool around the spring where the bubbling water overflows, and then people used to collect the water to drink from it. So Baruch means that which overflows, the overflowingness of Hashem. And what we say to Hashem is, may you overflow. May your Shechina, may your divine presence, may your Kadisha, your sanctity, may all your brachas, your blessings overflow onto us. Now, why does Hashem need our brachas? Why does he need that gift? Surely he is everywhere and all-powerful. Well, the answer is yes, of course he is. But he has chosen to give us the gift of free will. And therefore Hashem can only be present where we let him in. We have ownership over our minds, our consciousness, our internal sense of the world within which we live. And we can choose whether to let Hashem into that place or not. And when we make a bracha, we are saying to Hashem, may you be blessed, may you overflow, like we say to a human being, but in the special way when we're speaking to Hashem, may you overflow into this space. May you occupy the space. May your presence be able to exist within the world, because we have the control whether we allow Hashem into the world and into our lives. And therefore, Baruch is the most appropriate phrase to say when we eat something. We've just engaged in our own, what could be material and selfish pleasure. We may feel, as the Pasuk says, this is about me, my power, my strength. No, we say, this comes from Hashem. We recognize that there's space for Hashem. It's not about our smugness and our ego and our own abilities. It's about recognizing this comes from Hashem, and therefore the appropriate language to say is Baruch. So this is the first textual feature of the blessing. The next textual feature of this bracha, and indeed of many brachas that we say, is that there's a grammatical problem and essence in the bracha. Because almost every bracha starts off in the second person. Baruch atah Hashem. Blessed are you, Hashem. So we're speaking directly, second person, face to face almost, one to another. We humans are standing in front of Hashem, the master of the universe, and we're speaking directly to you, to Hashem. Baruch atah Hashem. But then we switch into the third person. We speak about him as he. Hazon es ha'olam, who sustains the world, kulo b'tovoi, with his kindness. Who nosein lechem l'chol basar? He gives bread to all humanity, to all flesh. Ki l'olam chasto, for his kindness is forever. So this bracha, along with many other brachas, switches mid-sentence from second to third person. Baruch atah Hashem, blessed are you Hashem. Shakol niyeh b'dvaroi, everything is in his word. So this is a feature of many brachas. Now there's two explanations as to why brachas have this unusual form. The first explanation is halachic, and the second explanation is more meditative. The halachic explanation is because there is a machlokas in the Gemara Yerushalmi, in the 9th chapter of Gemara Brachas, of the Yerushalayim Talmud, of the Talmud Yerushalmi, as to whether in general brachas should be said in the second or third person. How do we speak to Hashem? Should we speak to him in the second person, you, or should we speak to him in the third person, he? Now, really what's going on behind this machlokus is how familiar can we, to what familiar degrees, to what familiarity can we and should we relate to Hashem when we are saying brachas? Should we be able to address him directly as you? Or no, we are more distant and address him as he. And therefore, one answer to this question is that we, who leave this machlokus, this argument, unresolved, have both formulae used in brachas. We both address him as you and he, in order to fulfill both opinions in the Gemara Talmud Yerushalmi. One opinion is expressed by Rav, the great Amora Rav, another by the great Amora Shmuel, two of the foremost Gemara Talmud era authorities, and therefore we sustain both by using both languages. An alternative way of looking at this same idea is that actually a bracha takes us on a journey, because we know that we need to relate to Hashem in two modes. One mode is a mode of ahava, of love, in which we feel directly connected to Hashem. Why do we feel directly connected? Because we are conscious of the gifts that he gives us, of how he sustains us, of how he looks after us, of how he's there as a parent who brings us into being and continues to maintain us throughout our lives. And this is the mode of ahava, of love, of Inu, our father. But then there's a second mode. There's a mode of yira, of fear, or more accurately, yira should be translated as awe, of an awareness of the gulf that lies between us and him, of an awareness of the degree to which he transcends and is above and beyond any appreciation we can feel. And we constantly hover between these two modes and should hover between these two modes. This is a journey we're meant to go upon every day of our life and really every moment of our existence if we live with awareness of Hashem, of God's consciousness in our lives. So we say, Baruch Atah Hashem. We engage in a moment of love and appreciation of Hashem. We've just eaten a meal. We've just felt Hashem's kindliness and him sustaining us and him giving us the gift of life. And we feel an intense ahava, an intense connection. And then, as soon as we feel the intensity of this connection, we immediately retreat backwards. We become overwhelmed by that. This is too awe-inspiring and too distant. And therefore we shift into third person speech. We realize Hashem is ultimately other. He's beyond us, he's beyond our comprehension. He's ultimately an other, he's ultimately too far from us. And I say this because this is meant to be a very practical journey that we engage in every time we say a bracha. This isn't just a nice piece of philosophy. It's meant to be a meaningful part of our lived experience as Jews. We're meant to constantly in our lives feel a moment of connection, Baruch Atah, in which we feel this very intense awareness that we are standing in the presence of Hashem, and then immediately in the language of the Rambam, we're almost thrown backwards with an awareness of the awe and the gulf and the distance that ultimately lies between us and Hashem. And we are meant as Jews to hover between these two modes of existence. But by the way, we have this in our tefillah the whole time, and we perhaps don't notice this encoded into the language of prayer. We say Gadlu LaHashem iti when we take the Sefer Torah out. This is from Tehillim, chapter Lamed Daled. Gadlu LaHashem iti. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, bring greatness to Hashem with me. Recognize his greatness, feel that connection. But then we elevate him. Then we realize he is elevated. He's beyond our comprehension. He's the language of the pasuk Rom al kol goyim Hashem. Hashem is above all of us. He's beyond all of us. So we constantly need to feel and be balanced. These two modes of connection, of an awareness that Hashem is present. He's immanent. There's ahava. There's love. He carries us with him and looks after us and sustains us, and then ultimately he is beyond us and too far from us truly and ultimately to really engage with. We need to ultimately recognize yira, that he is above and beyond our abilities. So this is the first things that need to be said around the language of Birchas Hamazon. Having said that, the truth is that there is a switch also intent between the brachas themselves. And again, look at this next time you bench, all of us as we bench next time, we should look at this. The first bracha after that opening phrase of Baruch Atah Hashem is all in the third person, all he, the other. He's not present in front of me. When I say you, I'm speaking to you. When I say he or she, the third person pronoun, I mean someone that is a little removed. I'm not able to directly confront and face. The first bracha is all in the first person. This third person, I'm sorry. We refer to Hashem as he, whereas the next two brachas, Noidelecha Hashem Elokeinu, Al Shem Chalta Shaveseinu. We thank you, Hashem, for the land that you have given us. We thank you, Rachim Hashem Elokeinu, etc. Are all written in the second person, as if we're directly speaking to Hashem. And one explanation of this is remembering the history of the composition of the brachas. When we're in the midbar, we were just beginning our relationship with Hashem. It was early days. We were like a shy friend who hasn't yet formed a close and intimate connection, and therefore we only felt able to speak in the third person. The next two brachas were created when we were at home. We were living in Eretz Yisrael. We were now living together with Hashem in his home, in his palace. And therefore they were written in the second person when the Jewish people felt this very intense connection of a direct encounter with Hashem. And then finally, of course, we get to the fourth bracha, written about the kindness of Hashem, but when we are in exile, when we're very distant, the Beitar revolt, the massacre of the martyrs of Beitar, the very difficult post-destruction era of Jewish existence, and that goes back to being written in the third person when we are slightly removed and not able to connect so intensely and closely to Hashem. Moving on through the language of Birchas Hamazon, I'm just going to try and highlight a few features. We say the Chen, the Chesed over Rachamim, with Chen, grace, Chesed is kindness, and Rachamim is mercy. One way of understanding these three phases is that it refers to three stages in our existence as human beings. There's several ways to understand this, but this is how one way of understanding it, from a sefer called the Sefer HaIkrim, a figure called Albo, who lived in the era of the Rishonim, medieval era, and this is how he explains it. He says there's three stages in our life. When we are first born, all the kindness that we are given is chen. Chen is linked etymologically to the word chinon, free. It's completely undeserved. Everything we're given is for free. We're little children. We haven't achieved anything. We haven't worked anything, neither spiritually nor physically. We're given the gifts that we are given because we find favor, charm in the eyes of our parents, in the eyes of Hashem, completely undeserved. Chen. We then enter the productive years of our life when we achieve what we have through our own effort. We work hard, but ultimately it is founded on chesed, on the kindness of Hashem. Whatever work we put in, we know that we can only be successful with the kindness of Hashem. And then we enter the difficult stage of our life. As our strength wanes, as we don't have our full abilities, and as things get a little bit more different, and there we rely on Hashem's rachmim, Hashem's mercy, to continue to look after us. So this is the phrase of the chen, the chesed, or rachmim, that we have these three elements of awareness of Hashem. We carry on and we say that ba'avur shemo hagadol, everything we are given is ba'avur shemo hagadol, for the sake of his great name. And that means to say that we need to recognize that when we are davening, our tefillah isn't a lever to create greater security for ourselves. And this is really important when we daven. This isn't a tool to get from Hashem everything we want. It isn't for us, but it's for him, as it were. Of course, Hashem doesn't need it. He has everything. But what we need is to transcend ourselves, to recognize the truth that we are vulnerable, that we're dependent on him. The essence of avodah, of service of Hashem, is a reminder that we're not in control, but we are dependent on him and on his love and for his gift of existence. Ultimately, our existence is ba'avur shemo hagadol, l'man shmoi, for the sake of his name. Ba'avur shemo hagadol, we are here to bring the shame of Hashem, the name of Hashem, into the world and to bring awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu into our lives. We describe Hashem as Zon, or Mefane Sakol. We describe Hashem in the bracha as Ki Hu Kel Zon. He is a God who is Zon, who feeds us. Or Mefane Sakol, and he sustains everything. Or Meitiv Lakol, and he does good to everything. Zon refers to nourishment, the sustenance he gives us. Mefanes refers to parnasa, livelihood, our other needs, clothing and shelter. And Meitiv, goodness, refers to the luxuries that he gives us, the things beyond the basic needs that he has. And then we carry on and says, Umeichin mazon l'chol brios hashabara. He prepares food for all his creatures that he has created. And here we're moving beyond the human to all creatures, even to the animals. And Umeichin mazon, he prepares food. Because of course the animals don't work for their living. They don't prepare food. They are given food. They take that which is laid out for them. If they're herbivores, they graze on the grass and the leaves. If they're carnivores, they hunt. But they haven't made the food itself. It's meichin mazon. Hashem prepares the food for them, and they just need to toil to take it for themselves. Why do we mention this here? Because the truth is we are no different to the animals. We also eat that which is prepared for us by Hashem. We just don't notice it. We can think that we are creating our own food and working for it ourselves, but in truth, Hashem precedes our needs with the preparation of Meichin Mazon and Chol B'Yosef. He prepares everything for us, and if we could recognize that, then we would be taking on board the message, the true message of Birchas Hamazon, of Meichin Mazon, the Chol B'Yosef Hashabar, that Hashem ultimately prepares food for us. Now, this first bracha of Birchas Hamazon is a universal bracha. Very interesting. It doesn't have a mention of Jews, even though the trigger for the bracha is the mon in the desert, but it's a universalistic bracha. It's not just about Jews, it's about all humanity, and really chol basar, chol briosov. It's really about all the creatures. It's about the whole of the animal kingdom, the whole of the world. It's all sustained by Hashem. This is the first bracha of the Amidah, of the Birchas Hamazon. The second bracha of Birchas Hamazon now moves into the particularistic, into Jewish people, because now we say Noda. Now we thank Hashem for Eretz Yisrael, and in the third bracha we thank Hashem for the Beis HaMikdash. This is now the particularist, this is the unique, this is what's for us as Jews, and therefore in the second bracha we mention our unique relationship with Hashem, which is why we mention the bris, the covenant that we have with Hashem, and the Torah that we've been given, Chakecha, Shehudatonu, the mitzvahs that we are given, because once we are on our unique relationship to Hashem, the gift of Eretz Yisrael, we now have to deserve it. How do we deserve it? Because we have a covenant with Hashem, we have a partnership, a deal. What is the covenant? It's a deal, it's a partnership between us and the infinite Almighty, an amazing thing. What sort of partnership do we have? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to us, I've created you, and I want you to bring my presence into the world. I want you to partner with me in making the world and what it's meant to be, to making yourselves into what you're meant to be. And therefore, we mention a covenant with Hashem, and we mention Torah and mitzvahs that we are given. So the second bracha is a very different bracha. It's now a particularist bracha. It's a bracha about us in and our relationship to Hashem. I'm conscious of the passage of time, so I'm just going to highlight a couple of interesting features in this bracha. The first feature is that the bracha seems out of historic order. We thank Hashem for gifting us the land of Eretz Yisrael. And then we say, because you took us out of the land of Egypt. Well, we were first taken out of Egypt, and then we got Eretz Yisrael. But of course, the answer to the question is that we're recognizing that this comes from Hashem, and the true inheritance that we're given to Eretz Yisrael preceded our exile to Egypt, because the promise that was given to Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov to give us Eretz Yisrael, and therefore we thank Hashem first for the gift of Eretz Yisrael, given to us long before we went down to Egypt, and then that you took us out of the land of Egypt. Note that the bracha is us, us, us. You took us out of the land of Egypt. You gave us Eretz Yisrael. This reminds us, of course, of what we elaborate on Seder night, how we should see ourselves as having gone through these experiences, rather than it just being that which is given to our ancestors, but it's part of our own lived experience. Again, it's something just to reflect upon in the nusach, in the text of this bracha. I'll finish off with one final thought, and with that I'll finish because I don't want to go over the time that was allocated to us. The final of the three Torah brachas that we mentioned is the bracha Rachim, in which we ask Hashem for mercy and for the gift of for mercy and appreciation of the gift of Eretz Yisrael and the Beis HaMikdash, as I mentioned. We mention in Rachim the word Sion, which can refer to the whole of the Beis HaMikdash, the whole of Eretz Yisrael. And then we mention Yerushalayim, which is of course the capital of Eretz Yisrael. The literal meaning of the word Sion is either a signpost. Tzion means a signpost. Think of the word in Mutzion, that which is outstanding, that which stands out. In modern Hebrew, Mutzion is used for excellent. What it really means is that which is outstanding, that which stands out. Tzion is that which acts as a signpost, and we're acknowledging that Eretz Yisrael is a gift that signs us and directs us and builds our relationship with Hashem. And the conclusion of the bracha, in which we daven, V'nal tatzuchenu, please Hashem, don't make us need, lo lidei matnas basar v'dom, not for the gifts of flesh and blood, a physical sort of language, really bringing out our request to the horror. We don't want to receive from other human beings, we don't want to be dependent on others, but we want to only receive from Hashem. And this is because of this concept, really, the theme that refers to, is in the heart of the whole of Birchas Hamazon, that we want to recognize that everything we have comes from Hashem. And we carry on Shalom Vosh, that we should never be embarrassed. 2 languages of embarrassment. Busha refers to the shame that we experience internally. Kalima refers to embarrassment from others. Sometimes we can experience embarrassment from others, how they look on us, but sometimes internal shame when we feel we haven't lived up to our own standards. And this is also part of what we daven to Hashem, that we shouldn't experience that, but we should be able to always live up to our own standards. So these are some insights into the beautiful tefillah of Birchas Hamazon. We discussed its origins, the structure of Birchas Hamazon, its 5 components, how it dates back to Moshe, to Yeshua, to David and Shlomo, and how really the purpose of Birchas Hamazon is to convert all the food we eat into mon. What a wonderful experience and what an amazing bracha. If we want to know what it is like to experience tasting mon and being fed mon in the midbar, it's accessible to all of us through benching. That's what benching does, is it converts lechem, bread, not from min ha'oretz, but min ha'shamayim, that we can all eat truly bread from heaven. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share some of these thoughts with you.
Thank you so much. That's amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Zobin. You've certainly given us food for thought, quite literally. I know I don't think enough about benching. It's something you try and sort of get done before you move on to the next thing every day. So certainly gives us something to think about and concentrate on, and some lovely thoughts there. So ladies, thank you. So nice to see everybody. Feel free to stay on and chat afterwards. And